The lawyer's voice was steady, his words clear, but what he read made Caspian Rowe feel as if the air had left the room. To the children, Leora and Finian Dorn, I leave the Sterling estate, the vineyard, in Sonoma, and a 17% stake in Sterling Rowe Enterprises. Caspian's gaze snapped up, sharp and disbelieving. Who? He asked, his voice quieter than he expected. Who are Leora and Finian Dorn? The silence that followed was heavy. They're Miss Ariel Dorn's children, the lawyer answered. Time stood still. Ariel, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in nearly a decade, but one that never truly left him. She was supposed to be a chapter he'd closed. But now her children, were in the center of Elias Sterling's final will, and Caspian couldn't ignore the names. Not when one of them, the boy, carried his exact childhood middle name. Not when his mentor had left nearly a fifth of their empire to two strangers Caspian never knew existed. Unless they weren't strangers at all. He rose slowly from the mahogany chair, fingers curled tightly around the armrest as he looked down at the folder now open on the table. Two photographs stared up at him, a girl with eyes just like Ariel's, and a boy whose gaze mirrored his own. Leora and Finian, he murmured. His breath caught. He didn't know whether he was trembling from shock or shame. Maybe both. What would you do if a single sentence in a will changed everything you thought you knew about your past? And your future? Have you ever lost touch with someone you loved and wondered if they still thought of you? This story isn't just about fortune or business. It's about the kind of love that never really leaves, no matter how many years pass or how much distance grows. Stay with me until the end, and you'll see how a broken man finds not just forgiveness, but a family he never knew he had. If you've ever believed in second chances or wished someone gave you one, this story is for you. Tap the like button if this already has you hooked. And if you're new here, welcome to Mr. Raw's Story Trail. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment like this again. Before we continue, I want to say a short prayer for you, especially for every mother, sister, daughter, and woman listening right now. May your heart never be forgotten. May your love never go unnoticed. And may the ones who walked away return with open eyes and softened hearts. May healing find your home, and may you receive the love you've given so freely. Amen. Caspian remained standing, though his knees felt unsteady. The photographs on the polished table seemed to glow under the soft lamp, drawing him into a truth he wasn't prepared to face. He lifted the picture of the little girl first, Leora. Her smile was gentle but confident, the kind that told a story even without words. Ariel had always smiled that way, like she carried sunlight inside her. Then he looked at the boy. Finian, the shape of his jaw, the steady concentration in his eyes, even the slight tilt of his head. It was all too familiar. Why didn't she tell me? Caspian whispered under his breath. The lawyer paused, unsure if he should answer. Mr. Sterling left a recorded message for you, he said carefully, but he instructed that you listen to it alone. Caspian closed his eyes for a moment. Elias, the man who had lifted him from nothing, the man who once told him, strength means nothing if your heart is empty. Caspian never understood what he meant, until now. He turned away from the table, pacing once, twice, then stopping by the tall window overlooking the city. Cars moved like tiny sparks far below. Life continued as usual for the world outside, unaware that everything inside this room had shifted. His reflection stared back at him, controlled, composed, every detail of his suit perfect. The same image he'd built over years of sacrifice. But beneath the surface, something was cracking. If the twins were Ariel's, if Elias had cared for them, if he had been meant to know, Caspian rubbed a hand across his jaw, trying to calm the storm swirling inside his chest. Not anger, not yet. More like a grief he didn't understand. A grief for the years he never touched, the laughs he never heard, the birthdays he never celebrated. He moved back to the table and sat down slowly. Play the message, he said. The lawyer nodded, reaching for a small device. A soft click sounded, and then Elias Sterling's warm voice filled the room, older, gentler, carrying a weight Caspian had never heard before. Caspian, if you are hearing this, it means I have gone home. I hope you forgive me for leaving this burden in your hands, but it is also a gift, a truth you deserved to know a long time ago. Caspian leaned forward, breath tight. Ariel did not leave because she stopped loving you. She left because she feared losing herself, and feared losing you to the world demanding too much of you. When she found out she was expecting, she came to me first. She was scared. You were lost in your work. She didn't blame you. Caspian shut his eyes, pain slicing through him. I helped her. I cared for the twins. They became part of my heart. But you, Caspian, you are part of theirs, even if they don't know it yet. The recording ended. Caspian didn't speak, didn't move. At last, he whispered the only words he could form. I have to find them. The law office held a quiet kind of stillness, the kind that only comes when absence is fresh and grief hasn't yet settled into routine. The scent of old wood and faint cologne lingered in the air, clinging to everything Elias had once touched. Caspian Rowe sat alone at the long table, surrounded by silence and a few crisp legal documents. The hum of a distant clock ticked steadily, but to him, it sounded muffled, like he was underwater. He was used to stillness, but not this kind. He had known Elias Sterling for more than 20 years. The man was more than a mentor, more than a business partner. He had been the closest thing Caspian had ever known to a father. Elias never asked for anything in return for the loyalty he gave. He didn't need to. His presence alone commanded respect, and his wisdom left no room for arrogance. He saw Caspian, really saw him, when the rest of the world only saw a young man with too much ambition and too little patience. I see something in you, Elias once said. But you can't build your life with just sharp thinking and thick walls. You need to let someone in, or the success will feel like a prison. Caspian didn't know how to reply back then. He only nodded and buried himself in meetings, contracts, forecasts. And now, here he was, not as a partner or a protege, but as a man sitting across from Elias's last words on paper. Mr. Grayson, the family attorney, cleared his throat gently. Mr. Rowe, I'm ready to begin reading the will, if you're prepared. Caspian nodded once, jaw clenched. Proceed. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, unfolded the first page, and began. Much of it was expected. Financial disbursements, trust funds, charitable donations. Then came the line that fractured everything. To the children, Leora and Finian Dorn, I leave the Sterling estate, the vineyard, in Sonoma, and a 17% stake in Sterling Rowe Enterprises. The air shifted. Caspian's hand froze mid-movement, fingertips resting on the table's edge. His brow tightened, and his eyes, usually calm and unreadable, darkened with confusion. Who? He asked. The lawyer hesitated. Leora and Finian Dorn. Caspian's voice dropped. I don't know those names. The pause that followed was not just awkward, it was revealing. They're the children of Miss Ariel Dorn. The name hit like a stone dropped into still water. His chest tightened, as if something dormant had been shaken awake. He sat back in the chair, silent. The name felt both near and impossibly far. Ariel. Mr. Grayson gently placed a manila envelope in front of him. Mr. Sterling requested you be given this, privately, once that portion of the will was read. Caspian reached for the envelope with a hand that no longer felt steady. He didn't open it right away. He simply stared at his name, written in Elias's script. All capital letters. Sharp, familiar. He ran his thumb along the edge. Elias always said some truths don't fit in a sentence. They need space. And silence. This felt like one of those truths. He opened the envelope slowly, as if he already knew it would change him. Inside there were 2 photographs, crisp, recent, and heartbreakingly alive. The first was of a girl, no older than 7. She had long, unruly curls and a gaze that sparkled with curiosity. Her eyes were unmistakable, wide, luminous, and filled with the same quiet fire he used to see in Ariel. Leora. The second was a boy, Finian. His posture, the serious set of his mouth, even the way he looked slightly away from the camera, it was like staring into a memory, one he hadn't known he'd left behind. Caspian lowered the photos onto the table gently, like they might break. They're beautiful, he said, voice strained. He looks like me. The lawyer nodded silently. And you're telling me, Caspian continued slowly, that Elias, he's been involved in their lives? Mr. Grayson replied with care. Yes, he supported them, quietly, respectfully. He never imposed, but he made sure they had what they needed. He visited when he could. They knew him as a grandfather. Caspian leaned back in his chair, the weight of everything starting to land. All these years, he had worked side by side with Elias nearly every day, discussed markets, land deals, expansion plans, but never once, not once, had Elias mentioned the children, or Ariel, or anything that would have pointed Caspian to this truth. Unless he had, and Caspian hadn't listened. He closed his eyes, remembering moments now laced with new meaning. A time Elias paused outside his office, hesitant to speak. A weekend, Elias canceled their meeting, saying only, "I have family matters in California." And Caspian, as always, waved it off, buried under deadlines and ambition. Now he understood. "You said she never stopped loving me," Caspian murmured, more to himself than to the man across the table. "You said she left because she couldn't find me and the man I was becoming." He opened his eyes again, sharper now, more focused. "Where are they?" The lawyer hesitated. "Mr. Sterling left their location to you, yes. It's in the second envelope. But I urge caution. Ariel may not expect a visit, and the children don't know who you are." Caspian took the second envelope without a word. He didn't open it, yet. He simply held it, feeling the tremor in his chest building. "I'll approach them with care," he said finally. "But I need to see them." The lawyer nodded. Caspian stood, pushing the chair back gently. He looked around the room one last time. The familiar furniture, the thick books on the shelves, the oil painting Elias always joked made him look older than he was. This place had always felt like a fortress of clarity. Today, it felt like a quiet goodbye. He took the photographs in the envelope and turned toward the door. But before he stepped out, he paused, one hand on the frame. "Thank you," he said quietly. As he stepped into the hallway, the lights above hummed softly. He didn't feel like a billionaire. He didn't feel like a CEO. He felt like a man trying to remember the last time he truly felt something, and just beginning to understand what he'd missed. Years before suits and boardrooms. Years before headlines carried his name. Caspian Rowe was just a man trying to build something from scratch and avoid being destroyed by what he left behind. Brooklyn was still rough around the edges in those days, still honest in its corners. And it was in one of those corners, down a quiet side street with faded brick walls and strings of light hanging overhead, that he found her. The gallery wasn't famous. It didn't even have a sign outside. But inside, it was alive. Paintings covered the walls, some bright, others aching with emotion. And in the center of it all stood a woman with paint on her hands, her hair tucked into a loose knot, and the kind of expression that didn't belong to this century, thoughtful, open, completely unafraid to feel. She caught him staring at a canvas that looked like dusk melting into lavender fields. "You like it?" she asked, voice calm, slightly teasing. He turned, taken off guard by the soft confidence in her tone. "It's peaceful." She smiled, just a little. "That's what I was hoping for. I paint places that feel like home. I didn't expect to find this tonight," he said, stepping closer. "Neither did I," she replied, looking at him directly. "Most people walk past this place. You're either lost or looking for something you haven't named yet." He chuckled. "Maybe both." She held out a hand. Ariel. Caspian. Their handshake lingered, unspoken curiosity in the air between them. That night, they stayed long after the gallery closed. They sat on the worn leather couch in the back room, surrounded by paint tubes and forgotten canvases, sharing stories neither of them planned to tell. She didn't ask what he did, didn't press for titles or net worth. She asked about what made him stay up at night, what he was afraid to lose, what he remembered most about being a child. She listened like it mattered. He told her about growing up without much, about having a mother who worked 3 jobs and barely smiled by the time he turned 15, about watching people he trusted walk away when he needed them most. She told him about silence, not the kind you choose but the kind you grow up in. She said her parents loved each other but never figured out how to show it, so she learned to draw what they couldn't say. They shared takeout from a corner deli and drank tea from mismatched mugs. At some point, he leaned back and just looked at her. "You make it easy," he said. "Make what easy?" "Breathing," he replied. Her smile was soft, unsure of what to say. But she didn't look away. A few months later, he took her north, to a place he never told anyone else about. It was a small wooden cabin tucked into the edge of a forest in Vermont. No signal, no pressure, no polished speeches or busy city streets. Just stillness and snow that came in slow, deliberate flurries. Ariel's laughter the first morning was quiet but unguarded, the kind that came from being somewhere your heart recognizes even before your mind does. She walked barefoot across the old wooden floor, holding a mug between her paint-stained fingers. "This place," she whispered, "feels like it's been waiting." He didn't tell her how often he came here alone to forget the noise. He just said, "It's yours, if you want it to be." The days passed in a rhythm neither of them needed to define. She painted while sunlight streamed in through the tall windows. He made breakfast most mornings, terrible eggs, perfect toasts, and strong coffee. They read, talked, sat in silence without discomfort, and every night they cooked dinner together. Not because it was romantic or planned, just because it gave them something to do with their hands while their hearts did all the speaking. One evening, as wind whispered against the windows, she sat beside the fireplace, legs folded beneath her. She was painting again, not on a canvas this time, but on the inside of a cardboard box. Something about that moment, that casual act, undid him. "You really don't care about the world out there?" he asked, watching her from the couch. She didn't look up. "Not in the way they want me to. You don't care about money, status, owning things. I care about color," she said, "and people who mean what they say." Caspian looked at her, trying to memorize every detail, her hands, her steady expression, the ease she carried. "Most people, they'd want more." Ariel finally looked up at him. "That's because most people think love has to be earned with things. I think it just needs to be chosen. Every day." He didn't answer. Instead, he crossed the room, knelt in front of her, and rested his forehead gently against hers. They stayed like that for a while. No rush, no need for more than presence. Later that night, lying beneath a thick quilt, her head resting against his chest, she traced circles with her fingers on his skin, and asked, "If your company grows the way you think it will, if everything you touch turns into gold, promise me something." His arm tightened around her. "Anything. Promise me you won't lose this softness." He kissed the top of her head and whispered, "Not if you're beside me." She didn't reply right away, but he felt her smile against his skin. And in that quiet room, surrounded by falling snow and the warmth of a fire they built, together neither of them imagined that time could move forward without mercy, that promises made in stillness would be tested in noise, that something so simple could ever become complicated. The first cracks didn't come with an argument. They came quietly, hidden in small absences, longer work calls, and late-night silences that once held warmth but now felt unfinished. Sterling Row was expanding fast. Too fast, some warned, but Caspian didn't slow down. Investors circled constantly. Media outlets began calling him a visionary. Boards sought his insight. Competitors tried to mimic his model but couldn't match his precision. The company was no longer a dream. It was a machine, and Caspian had become its fuel. Ariel watched the transformation happen slowly. He was still the man who brought her tea in the morning, still the man who kissed her shoulder when she was half asleep. But something was changing. He began speaking more in numbers than in feelings. His eyes stayed open longer at night, staring at reports instead of her. One evening she sat across from him at dinner. He was nodding to something she said, but she could tell he hadn't heard a word. His hand was still holding his fork, mid-air, paused in thought. "Caspian," she said gently. He blinked and looked up. "Sorry, say that again?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's okay. It wasn't important." But it had been. She had told him about a gallery nearby that was opening spots for local artists. She had painted something new, something that felt close to her. She had been hoping he'd come see it. That night, she placed the canvas back under the bed. The next few weeks blurred. He traveled often, sometimes with only a day's notice. The cabin in Vermont sat untouched, snow falling around it like forgotten time. Ariel stayed in the city, alone, mostly. She painted when she could. She went for long walks, but the space between them was growing, and she didn't know how to stop it. One day, she found a note he scribbled on the back of a printed speech. "Push the acquisition. Delay phase 2. Call Elias about Friday." It wasn't addressed to her, but the fact that it was the only message she saw all week felt heavier than it should have. She kept telling herself it was temporary, that love like theirs didn't just vanish. But love, she realized, needs tending, and they hadn't sat across from each other like them in a long time. Then came the event. It wasn't just another fundraiser. It was an evening to announce a new expansion deal. All eyes were on Sterling Rowe, and Caspian was the main speaker. Ariel wore a simple black dress, her hair pinned softly at her neck. She arrived quietly, blending into the side of the room. She stood near the back, watching him from a distance as he took the stage. The applause was loud. His voice carried well. He thanked Elias. He praised his team. He spoke about ambition, growth, innovation. But not once, not even in passing, did he look for her. As the room clapped again, rising to their feet, Ariel stepped back, turned, and walked out the side door. Outside, the air was cool. Still, she didn't cry. Not there. She just stood under the quiet sky, knowing that something had ended. Not with shouting, not with blame, but with distance that had gone unnoticed too long. Caspian noticed her absence the next morning. He returned to their apartment after another late meeting, key turning in the door as usual, but the silence inside felt different. Stillness wasn't unusual between them, but this wasn't quiet. It was empty. Her shoes were gone. The small painting she had left on the hallway table, the one with blue and burnt orange brushstrokes, wasn't there. The studio light was off. Her tea mug sat clean in the dish rack, and for the first time in years, the air didn't carry any trace of her scent. He waited until morning before trying to call her. The number was no longer in service. At first, he assumed she needed space. A few days, maybe. But when he checked the gallery, it was closed. No sign on the door. No word from anyone. Not even their shared neighbor who used to borrow sugar from her on Sunday mornings. He searched in his own way, quietly but thoroughly. Connections, records, but it was as if she had erased herself without leaving a trail. That was the thing about Ariel. When she left, she didn't slam doors. She simply stopped being where she used to be. It shook him, but not enough to make him stop. Sterling Rowe was in the middle of an expansion deal. A new branch in San Diego, a venture in medical AI that needed oversight. Investors were flying in from overseas. Every time he looked at her name in his phone, he hesitated, then turned back to the task in front of him. Until Elias called. "Son," Elias began gently, "you've been different." "I'm focused," Caspian replied. "That's not what I said." There was silence between them. Elias had a way of saying things without force, yet they landed heavy. "I saw her," Elias continued. "A few weeks ago." Caspian sat up straighter. "She reached out to you?" "She didn't have to. I found her. She looked tired, not weak, never weak. But she was carrying something alone." Caspian's throat tightened. "Where?" "She asked me not to tell you." "Why would you honor that?" "Because she needed time, and you weren't listening." That struck harder than Caspian expected. "You always told me to stay focused," he said quietly. Elias didn't hesitate. "I told you to build something that would last. I didn't mean a company." The call ended with no resolution, just more silence. More time passed, and with it, the edges of that chapter softened until her name became something he didn't allow others to mention, until her memory became something he folded and placed in the quietest part of himself. He buried the softness she loved. He buried it so deep, he almost forgot what it felt like. Almost. Caspian's silence wasn't loud. It was slow, gradual, real. Have you ever lost someone, not because you stopped caring, but because the version of you they loved started to disappear? Drop a comment below. Have you ever let ambition distance you from someone you loved? Or have you ever had to walk away to protect your peace? This story reminds us, love needs attention, not just intention. If this part hits your heart, go ahead and like the video. And if you're watching quietly, you're welcome here. Mr. Ross Story Trail is a place where stories feel like memories, and lessons come wrapped in emotion. Subscribe for more. The door to the law office closed behind him with a gentle thud, but the sound echoed in Caspian's chest long after. He stepped into his car and sat still for a moment. The photos were in his hand again, creased now from how tightly he'd held them. He looked down at them once more, as if trying to prove to himself that this was real. Leora, Finian. Even their names felt like something he should have known. The girl's eyes were Ariel's, full of curiosity, that kind of brightness that didn't come from the world but from within. The boy. The longer Caspian stared, the more he felt something in himself fracture. Finian didn't just resemble him, he mirrored him. It wasn't the shape of the jaw or the tilt of the head, it was the gaze. A knowing calm that shouldn't belong to a child, but Caspian remembered seeing it in the mirror when he was that age. A gaze shaped by longing and questions that had no voice. He leaned back, pressing the photos against his chest, his breathing uneven. "I would have been there," he whispered, though no one was around to hear it. "If I had known, I would have been there." But had he really been reachable? He thought back to those years, the constant flights, the headlines, the handshakes. The nights he fell asleep with his phone still glowing in his hand. The days blurred together. What would he have done with a phone call from Ariely then? Would he have picked up? He wasn't sure. And that broke him more than the photos did. He looked out the window now, the city alive and indifferent outside. People crossed intersections. Shops closed their doors for the evening. Life moved forward, unaware of the reckoning happening inside one man in the back of a black car. The photo slid from his hands and landed on the seat beside him. He picked up the second envelope. This one held no weight in paper, but everything in meaning. Inside was a handwritten note from Elias. Just a few lines. "They are in Sonoma, near the edge of the vineyard. She teaches art at a community center. You'll find her there. But don't go as the man you are now. Go as the man she once believed in." Caspian read it twice. The words stung, not out of cruelty, but because Elias had known exactly where to aim. Go as the man she once believed in. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. There were no more excuses left. He opened his phone and searched quietly, methodically. Ariel's name still brought up nothing on social media. No website, no gallery affiliation, but when he searched for community art centers in Sonoma, one listing stood out, an article about a children's art exhibit hosted by local artist and teacher Ariel D. The image that accompanied the post was small, but it was her, older, softer in some ways, stronger in others. Her eyes hadn't changed. Caspian tapped the photo with his thumb. "I'm coming," he said under his breath. "I should have come years ago." Caspian wasn't sure what he was packing for. A conversation, a confrontation, a beginning? He stood in his penthouse closet, hands still for once. The space was curated for convenience. Tailored suits, crisp shirts, loafers lined like soldiers. Everything neat, pressed, professional. He left them untouched. Instead, he reached for a simple black sweater, jeans, a coat he hadn't worn in years, the kind Ariel once borrowed and spilled lavender tea on during a trip upstate. The stain had never fully come out, and she laughed, saying it added character. He folded it carefully. For the first time in years, his luggage didn't look like it belonged to a CEO. The plane ride to California was quiet. No assistant beside him. No emails queued up. Just the steady hum of flight and a weight on his chest that no amount of altitude could lift. He kept the photos close, tucked inside a small notebook. Every so often, he would glance at them, studying Leora's wild curls and Finian's calm focus. He tried to imagine what their voices sounded like, what made them laugh. If they liked toast the way he did, burnt just slightly on the edges. He wondered what they called Elias. Grandpa? Pops? Did they know how much that man had done for them? For him? He owed Elias more than a thank you. He owed him the truth. He owed him follow through. But most of all, he owed those children the one thing no inheritance could replace, presence. As the car moved through the roads of Sonoma the next day, Caspian looked out at the wide fields stretching into the horizon. The land was generous here, open, golden, warm. The vineyard Elias left to the twins stretched for acres, its rows neat and full of promise. He didn't know what he expected. A gate, maybe. Resistance. But what greeted him instead was simplicity. He asked the driver to stop just outside the art center, a small sun-washed building, with ivy creeping up one side and a sign that read, "The Color House." Caspian stepped out of the car, suddenly uncertain. This wasn't a boardroom. There were no strategies here. Just a woman he once loved, and two children who didn't even know his name. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the photo of Finian again, and stared at it. "I missed your first steps," he whispered. "I missed your first words. I missed your first everything." He looked toward the door of the center and felt his heart thud. But he wasn't walking in as the man who built Sterling Row. He was walking in as a man who was learning, finally, how to show up. Ariel stood barefoot on the porch, a mug of chamomile tea cupped between her palms. The late afternoon sun cast everything in a soft warmth. The vineyard beyond the railing rolled gently across the land, rows of vines swaying in rhythm with the breeze. In the distance, Leora and Finian darted between the grapevines, their laughter carrying faintly through the stillness. She watched them with quiet awe, not because they were perfect, but because they were hers. Every smile, every curious question, every stubborn refusal to go to bed early, each of it a note in the music of her life now. It hadn't always been this peaceful. There were nights early on when she cried silently in the bathroom, pressing her palm over her mouth so the twins wouldn't hear. There were mornings when the ache of raising them alone felt like a mountain on her chest. She hadn't planned it this way. When she first realized she was pregnant, she was standing in the back room of a small supply store, staring at the test with trembling fingers. The second line appeared slowly, and her breath caught. Her first thought wasn't fear. It was him. She had held the news in her heart for days, unsure how or when to tell him. But every attempt was swallowed by missed calls, late meetings, a version of Caspian who was slowly becoming a stranger. So she didn't tell him. She told Elias instead. They met at a diner near her apartment, and when she finally managed to say the words aloud, she couldn't stop crying. Elias reached across the table, placing his large, steady hand over hers. "You're not alone," he had said, and he meant it. He helped her find a place to live outside the city, a modest house near the edge of the Sterling estate, surrounded by olive trees and silence. When the twins were born, he was there, pacing the hallway, handing her water, holding Leora while Finian slept. He never pressed her to reach out to Caspian, never judged her choice to stay away. He simply filled the spaces that needed love and presence. He became their grandfather in every way that counted. Leora adored him. She used to sit on his lap and paint tiny suns on his hands with her fingers. Finian followed him like a shadow, mimicking the way he trimmed vines or polished garden tools. He gave them stories at bedtime, long walks on the property, small lessons about courage and kindness. And when he got sick, he kept it from them. He didn't want their joy touched by worry. Only Ariel knew. She remembered the last time they spoke alone. He was thinner then, a little slower, but still full of that steady grace. "I want you to promise me something," he had said. "What?" "That you won't close the door forever. That if one day Caspian comes looking, you'll open it." Ariel hesitated. "What if it's too late?" Elias smiled. "Love isn't a schedule, it's a choice." The day Elias passed, Ariel didn't cry right away. She walked the twins to school like usual. She taught her morning class at the arts center. She made lunch, folded laundry, and picked up a basket of fresh produce from the market. It wasn't until she stepped onto the porch that evening, his porch, the one overlooking the vineyard, that her knees gave way. She sank onto the wooden steps, arms wrapped around herself, and let the quiet press against her chest until it cracked her open. He had been her anchor, her protector, her reminder that love didn't always leave when things got hard. Now he was gone, and all she had left were memories and a letter he left behind. She kept it tucked in her nightstand, unread, not because she didn't want to know what he said, but because reading it would make it final. She wasn't ready for that. Instead, she poured herself into the children. She packed their lunches with handwritten notes, small drawings, riddles only they would understand. She helped Leora build a treehouse sketch and watched with a full heart as Finian tried to figure out how to turn it into reality with cardboard and tape. They didn't ask about Caspian, because they didn't know to. She had never spoken his name in their presence, not out of anger, not even regret, but out of protection. She didn't want them growing up with questions about why he wasn't there. She didn't want to fill their minds with incomplete stories. And so when they asked about their father, she told them what was true without telling the whole story. "He was someone I loved," she said once, while brushing Leora's hair. "And sometimes love gets lost when people lose sight of themselves." "Did he love you back?" Leora asked, her voice small. Ariel paused, her fingers gently tangled in the curls. "Yes," she whispered. "Very much. But sometimes even love isn't enough to keep people close." She thought that would be the end of it. But as the weeks passed after Elias's death, she found herself thinking of Caspian more. Not in anger, not even with longing, but with a strange, quiet ache. One that came with the passing of time and the understanding of how fast it moves when you're not watching. She didn't know if he knew about the twins. She doubted Elias would have told him without her blessing, and she never gave it. Still, sometimes when she watched Finian walk ahead of her, shoulders straight, hands in his pockets, she saw the shadow of a man he'd never met. And sometimes when Leora painted for hours without stopping, humming to herself with paint smeared on her cheek, Ariel's throat tightened. They carried Caspian in ways she never had to explain. She looked out over the vineyard again now, sipping the last of her tea, watching the sunlight stretch across the horizon. The wind rustled gently through the vines. And though she didn't know it yet, though no letter had arrived, no footsteps echoed down the path, change was already on its way, the kind that doesn't knock before it enters. Ariel was standing near the back gate when she saw the car pull in. She didn't recognize it. No one ever arrived through the lower road, except Elias, her hand tensed around the basket of laundry she had just collected from the line. The twins were inside, finishing their afternoon reading. The sun sat lower now, gold slipping into a softer glow. She squinted toward the figure stepping out. Tall, composed, dressed simply, but unmistakable. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen that face in nearly 8 years, but her body remembered. The tilt of his shoulders, the way he stood still before moving forward, the quiet control. Caspian. He didn't speak at first. He walked slowly down the dirt path toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. Ariel didn't move, didn't blink. Her heart was loud in her chest, but she kept her expression steady. When he finally reached her, he stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the faint lines near her eyes, the sun-kissed freckles across her nose. She looked different, and yet exactly the same. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. So she spoke first. "How did you find me?" His voice was low, rough around the edges. "Elias." Her lips pressed into a line. She looked away for a moment, steadying herself. "Of course. I didn't know," he added. "I figured." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded photo of Finian, held it between them. "I wasn't sure," he said, "until I saw him." Ariel's jaw clenched softly, but she didn't argue. Instead, she nodded once. "Yes. That's your son." The words felt heavier in the air than she expected. He looked it down, his hands tightening around the photo before slipping it away. "They're mine?" he asked again, quietly, as if needing to hear it from her directly. She met his eyes, steady and unwavering. "They're ours." The silence that followed was not cold, but full of time, memory, distance, and all the versions of themselves that had existed between then and now. Caspian swallowed hard. "I didn't come here to take anything. I needed to see them." Ariel studied him. His voice held no demand, no edge, only something unfamiliar coming from him. Humility. She glanced toward the house. "They don't know about you." "I figured," he said, echoing her earlier tone. "I told them he was someone I loved. Once." He looked at her then, not just at her face but through it, past the defenses, past the years. "I never stopped," he said. Ariel didn't answer. Not yet. Ariel led him to the porch quietly, the space between them still full of questions neither of them was ready to ask. From inside the house, voices floated out. "Mom." Finian broke the paint cup again. "No, I didn't. It was already cracked." Caspian smiled faintly. Ariel did too, just barely. "Stay here," she said gently. "Let me talk to them first." He nodded, remaining on the edge of the porch as she disappeared inside. A few moments later, the door opened again, and there they were. Leora ran out first, all wild hair and energy. Finian followed, quieter but observant. "Kids," Ariel said calmly, "this is Mr. Caspian. He was a close friend of Mr. Elias." Both twins stopped. Leora tilted her head. "You knew Papa, E." Caspian knelt a little to meet her eyes. "Yes. A very long time." Finian narrowed his gaze. "Did you work with him?" "Yes," Caspian answered softly. "He taught me more than most people ever will." The boy didn't say anything else, but he nodded. Leora leaned forward suddenly. "Did you ever help with the grape pressing? Papa E let me do it once, but only after I promised not to squish the worms." Caspian laughed lightly. "I didn't get that privilege. You must have been very important." She grinned. "I am." Ariel stood nearby, watching the three of them. Her arms were crossed, but her fingers were curled tightly under her elbow. She had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways. She had feared it, but nothing prepared her for how strange and beautiful it felt, watching. The the man she once loved, kneel before the children they created. Children he didn't know, children who were drawn to him instinctively. Caspian looked up at her. "I'd like to stay, just a little while." Ariel hesitated. "Not to push anything," he added, "just to learn who they are, even if they don't know who I am yet." She looked down at the twins, so unaware of the weight in the air around them, and then back at him. "All right," she said, "for now." That evening, they walked together through the vineyard, Ariel beside the children, Caspian just behind. Finian asked questions about the soil. Leora picked wildflowers and placed one behind her mother's ear. Caspian answered softly when spoken to, laughed when prompted, and mostly just observed. Every moment felt like something sacred he was being allowed to witness. At one point, Leora dropped back beside him. "You look at my mom like she's a painting you forgot about." Caspian blinked, caught off guard. "Do the first." She nodded seriously. That's how Papa E looked at the vineyard, like it had a secret. He didn't know what to say, so he just smiled. "Maybe I'm remembering something important. There are moments in life when silence speaks louder than any apology. Have you ever stood face to face with someone you once loved and didn't know what to say first? Do you believe in second chances? Tell us below. I believe in second chances, but only when I gave someone a second chance, and if this part of the story moved something in you, click the like button to let us know. And if you're quietly watching from the background, you're not alone. Subscribe for more stories that reach where words don't always go. This is Mr. Raw's story trail. Caspian didn't leave after that first visit. Ariel didn't ask him to, and the twins, innocent to the truth, welcomed him into their daily rhythm with a kind of ease that made everything hurt just a little more. He rented a small guest house at the edge of the property, the one Elias used to stay in during harvest season. It was modest, quiet, and surrounded by olive trees. Each morning, he'd walk to the main house and join them for breakfast, nothing extravagant. Just toast, fruit, and the occasional stack of pancakes Leora insisted on making even when she burned the first batch. Finian sat across from him most days, guarded but observant. Caspian didn't push. He just listened. "I'm building a model ship," Finian told him once, without looking up. "But I can't get the balance right." Caspian waited. "Show me sometime if you want." The boy gave a small nod. That was all. Leora was different. Open, inquisitive. She asked questions nonstop, about the city, about buildings taller than trees, about whether he knew how to whistle with his fingers. One afternoon, she pulled out a jar of buttons from an old drawer and said, "These are my treasures." He smiled. "Why buttons?" "Because no one ever notices them," she said. "But they hold everything together." That night, Caspian lay awake in the guest house thinking about her words, about how something so small could mean so much. By the third day, he helped Ariel carry groceries from the car. She didn't say much as they walked side by side, but she didn't pull away either. When they reached the porch, she finally spoke. "They like you. I like them." She paused. "They don't know what that means yet." He nodded. "I understand." She looked at him then, not coldly, but not softly either. "You're getting to know them as a guest," she said. "But I raised them. Every scraped knee, every school form, every night they were scared of shadows. I was the one who showed up." "I know," he said quietly. "And I'm not trying to take anything from you. I just want to be part of their world. If there's space." Ariel held his gaze for a long moment, then turned back to the door. Inside, Leora was sketching something at the table. Finian was trying to balance a coin on its edge. Caspian stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping in. That evening, he sat with them on the back porch, watching the sky shift into evening. Finian leaned against the rail beside him. "Why do you come here every day?" he asked bluntly. Caspian didn't answer right away. "Because I want to know what I missed," he said finally, "and who I've missed." The boy didn't respond, but the next morning, he was the one who knocked on Caspian's door first. It happened by accident. Caspian was looking for a pencil sharpener at the kitchen counter. Leora had asked for help with her homework, and while digging through the side drawer, he found a worn cloth pouch tucked beneath an old stack of note cards. It wasn't labeled. He might have put it back without a second thought until it fell open. Inside was a small sketchbook, pages thick and warped from use. He flipped it open, careful not to smudge the pencil lines. The drawings inside weren't simple. They weren't the kind you tape to a fridge out of obligation. They were real. Emotion poured out of every figure. One page showed two children sitting beneath a tree, hand in hand. Their faces were turned upward, gazing at a figure just out of frame. Another page had a man standing at the edge of a vineyard, alone, his face unfinished, just lines where features should have been. The next sketch took his breath away. A man kneeling beside a little girl, handing her a paper airplane. The girl's smile was full and certain. The man's hand trembled in the drawing, almost as if the artist knew he didn't fully belong there. Yet, Caspian stared at it. "Why are you looking at that?" He turned around. Leora stood by the hallway, arms crossed, eyes guarded. He closed the sketchbook gently and held it out to her. "I didn't mean to pry. I was just looking for a pencil." She walked over slowly and took it from him, clutching it close to her chest. "It's private." "I know," he said. "And it's beautiful." She didn't speak. "I'd never seen anything like it," he added. "You draw with honesty." "I don't show anyone those," she whispered. "Not even your mom?" Leora shook her head. "They're not finished. Some stories don't need to be finished to be felt." She looked up at him, surprised by the softness in his tone. "Do you know who that is?" she asked, flipping back to the sketch of the kneeling man. Caspian hesitated. "I think I do. He visits in my dreams," she said. "Sometimes he's happy, sometimes he just cries." The lump in his throat nearly choked him. He crouched so they were eye level. "If he knew how special you were, I think he'd cry from being proud." Leora blinked fast, nodding once before walking away, sketchbook still pressed against her heart. That night, Caspian stayed out on the porch long after the lights inside had dimmed. Ariel joined him without a word, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to him, then sat across the railing. "You found her drawings?" she asked. He nodded. "I wasn't snooping, just stumbled into them." "I know. She's gifted. She's her own galaxy," Ariel said softly. Caspian looked down at his hands. "They have whole lives I don't know. Inside jokes, favorite lullabies, games, routines." Ariel sipped her tea. "You asked me once to promise I wouldn't lose my softness," he said. "I remember." "I did." "I know." He looked at her then. "Do you think it's too late to find it again?" Ariel didn't rush her answer. When she finally spoke, it was gentle but true. "That's not something I can answer for you, Caspian. It's something they'll answer over time. If you show up." He nodded, taking in her words, her presence, the cool stillness between them. In that quiet moment, he didn't feel like a man trying to fix something. He felt like a man trying to finally be someone worth staying for. The vineyard was quiet at night, the kind of quiet that felt earned, like a deep breath at the end of a long day. The children had gone to bed. The house behind them was lit with one lamp in the kitchen. Everything else was wrapped in stillness. Ariel sat on a wooden bench beneath a canopy of stars. She was wrapped in a shawl, legs tucked beneath her, watching the sky shift from blue to deep charcoal. Caspian approached slowly, a glass of water in his hand, unsure if he was interrupting something private. "You can sit," she said without looking at him. He did. For a while, they said nothing. The sounds of the earth filled in the silence, crickets, wind moving through the vines, the faint creak of old wood. "I used to come out here when they were babies," Ariel said softly. "Sometimes after they'd fallen asleep, sometimes when they wouldn't stop crying." Caspian glanced at her. "This was my moment to remember I was still a person, not just a mother trying not to fall apart." He looked out at the vines. "You never told me. I didn't think you'd hear it." The words weren't cruel. They were just true. He nodded slowly. "I wasn't listening, not to anything that wasn't tied to numbers or deadlines." She turned toward him now, her voice calm but clear. "You disappeared into a life you chose. I didn't leave to punish you. I left because I couldn't breathe in that world." Caspian met her gaze. "I didn't know you were carrying our children." "I know. I should have asked more. I should have paid attention when things started slipping." "You didn't want to see it," she replied, "because admitting something was wrong would have meant stopping, and you were afraid to stop." The silence between them wasn't cold. It was full of ache, full of what they never said when it would have mattered most. "I think I was scared," he admitted. "Scared that if I stopped moving, everything would fall apart. That if I let myself feel too much, I wouldn't be able to function." She softened, just slightly. "I understand that now. I didn't then. I wish I had told you that I loved you more than all of it, but I didn't know how to say it in the middle of trying to prove I mattered." "You always mattered," she whispered. He blinked quickly, eyes misting. I didn't know how to be both strong and soft, and when you left, it felt like the world confirmed my worst fear, that the moment I let go, I'd lose everything. But I wasn't asking you to let go, Ariel said. I was asking you to make space. The words landed hard, but clean, not bitter, just deeply honest. Caspian looked up at the stars, their quiet brightness somehow more forgiving than anything on earth. I want to do better, he said. Not because I feel guilty, but because I finally see what I've missed. Ariel rested her elbows on her knees and clasped her hands. She didn't cry. She hadn't in a while. There was something beyond tears in this moment, something steadier. I used to wonder, she said, if you ever looked for me. I did, Caspian replied, but not hard enough. Not with the right heart. She looked at him. I had resources, access, ways to find anyone. But the truth is, I think I was afraid of what I'd find. Afraid you'd moved on. Afraid you hadn't. Ariel gave a quiet nod. There were nights I hated you, not because you left, because you didn't notice I was already gone. Caspian winced at the truth in her voice. He didn't interrupt. And then, she continued, I stopped hating you. That was harder, actually, because it meant letting go of the part of me that hoped you'd come back before it was too late. He lowered his gaze. I see them now, our children, and I realize I didn't just lose you, he whispered. I lost entire seasons of their lives, their first steps, their first words. I missed the moment Finian held your hand crossing the street for the first time. I missed Leora's first painting. He swallowed hard. And they're still so full of love. They don't even know who I am, and yet they invite me in. Because Elias made sure they knew kindness, Ariel said. He didn't tell them about you, but he never made you the villain either. I owe him everything, Caspian replied. You owe them everything. He nodded slowly. I know. She stood and stepped down from the bench, walking a few feet into the vineyard. The stars stretched wide above her, endless and watchful. He followed, keeping a respectful distance. I'm not here to rewrite the past, he said. I know I can't, but if you'll let me, I'd like to help shape what comes next. Ariel turned back to him. Her face was calm, but not closed. And what does that look like? Whatever you and they need. I'll go at their pace. I'll stay where I'm wanted. I'm not asking to pick up where we left off. I'm asking for a place to begin again. The wind moved gently through the vines. She studied him for a long moment. Do you regret what happened? I regret that I became someone you couldn't stay with, he answered. But I don't regret loving you. That part has never changed. Ariel exhaled slowly. You've changed, Caspian. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet, she said, stepping a little closer. But for the first time, I believe you're really here. He didn't reach for her. He didn't try to close the gap. He just nodded, as if that truth alone was something worth holding. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's choosing to release someone from the weight they once carried in your heart. Have you ever had to ask for forgiveness? Or give it when it wasn't easy? Share in the comments, I forgave because I didn't expect forgiveness, but if this moment in the story stirred something inside you, let us know by clicking the like button. Subscribe for more stories that remind us of the beauty in rebuilding, not just relationships, but ourselves. This is Mr. Ross' Story Trail, where healing doesn't shout. It whispers in moments like this. The days moved gently after that night beneath the stars. Nothing grand shifted all at once, but something had softened. Arielle no longer kept her arms crossed when they spoke. The children no longer looked puzzled when Caspian stayed for dinner. Even the house itself seemed to welcome him with fewer questions in its silence. He didn't overstep. He showed up. Early mornings, sleeves rolled, boots dusty. The harvest had started, and the vineyard demanded presence. Caspian took to the work without fanfare. He asked Elias's former groundskeeper for help learning the ropes. The man, a quiet soul named Benji, raised an eyebrow when Caspian introduced himself plainly. I thought you'd be wearing something shinier, Benji muttered. Caspian chuckled. Not anymore. They worked in long rows of vines side by side, under a sun that neither favored nor punished. Caspian learned how to test the grapes by touch, how to lift without bruising. He listened. He kept pace. At the end of each day, his back ached and his hands bore marks of the labor. But he felt something unfamiliar. Peace. One afternoon, Leora wandered into the field barefoot. waving a paper fan she'd made out of scrap cardboard. "You're sweating," she announced with mock authority. "Hard not to in this heat," Caspian replied, wiping his brow. She handed him the fan. "I made this for Finian, but he said it looked weird." "I think it's perfect." She beamed. "You can have it." He took it carefully, as if it were a family heirloom. From a distance, Ariel watched the exchange. She didn't interrupt, just stood for a while, her hand resting lightly on the porch railing, the breeze lifting the edge of her blouse. Later that evening, Caspian noticed the old fence by the east end of the property sagging under its own weight. "It's been falling apart since before Elias passed," Ariel said when he mentioned it. "I keep saying I'll get to it. I'll handle it." She raised an eyebrow. "You build fences now." "I do what needs doing." And he did. Over the next 2 mornings, Caspian repaired the entire stretch by hand. He didn't hire anyone. He worked until the sun dipped low, dirt clinging to his forearms, splinters decorating his fingers. Finian joined him on the second day, holding nails, learning how to grip the hammer without straining. "You did this with Elias too?" Finian asked. "No," Caspian answered. "This is something I'm learning now, with you." Finian didn't respond, but when they finished the last plank, he gave Caspian a quiet nod of approval before running back to the house. That evening, Ariel brought out lemonade and 2 glasses. "You didn't have to do all that." "I wanted to." She handed him a glass. "You're different." He looked at her, eyes calm. "I'm trying to be someone worth staying for." She didn't answer, but she stayed beside him a little longer that night, long after the stars returned. The evening air was cool when Caspian returned to the vineyard alone. It was the same path he had walked days earlier, but everything looked different now. The vines stood tall and full, and the sky had just begun its slow descent into dusk, burnished gold turning quietly to amber. He carried something small in his pocket, something he'd kept for years, never quite knowing why. Ariel was closing up the porch when he arrived. She turned, surprised to see him alone, his sleeves rolled up, hands dusted with dirt and sawdust. "You missed dinner," she said. "I needed a minute," he replied, offering a small smile. "Do you mind coming with me?" She hesitated, then nodded. They walked in silence, down past the fence he had repaired, past the olive trees Elias once planted, and into the heart of the vineyard. The rows stretched around them like arms gently circling a memory. When they stopped, the light fell just right, casting long shadows that didn't feel heavy. "I used to imagine this moment," Caspian said, facing her. Ariel looked at him with curiosity. "I thought it would be on a rooftop," he continued. "In the city, big lights, champagne, the works, something impressive." She smiled faintly. "You were always good at impressive." "I was terrible at simple," he replied. "But I've come to understand that the most sacred things in life don't shout. They stay, they grow, they wait for you to get quiet enough to see them." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring. Not flashy, no gemstone, just a simple gold band, slightly scuffed. "I bought this years ago," he said. "After Vermont, before everything changed. I carried it in my briefcase for weeks, thinking I'd find the right moment. But there was always one more meeting, one more milestone to chase. And eventually, I buried it under my schedule like I buried everything else that mattered." Ariel stood very still. Caspian held the ring out between them. "I'm not asking you to forget the past. I'm not pretending this is neat or easy. I'm just asking if you'll let me choose you again, not from a distance, not when it's convenient, but every day, here, with them." He paused. "I want to build something that grows roots, with you, with our children, and I want to do it right this time." Ariel didn't reach for the ring immediately. She looked at it, then at him. "You're not the man I left," she said softly. "I hope not. You still have parts of him, the ambition, the stubbornness, the control." He nodded. "I know, but you're listening now. You're showing up." Her voice cracked just slightly. "I'm not afraid of loving you again," she added. "I'm afraid of losing you the same way I did before." Caspian stepped closer, lowering the ring. "Then I won't make you a promise with words. I'll make it with presence." She looked up at him. "Say it," she whispered. "Never disappear again." Ariel closed her eyes. When she opened them, she reached for his hand and placed it gently over her heart. "Then yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, not with flourish, but with reverence, like setting something delicate into place. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, the vineyard stood in quiet witness. Not to a beginning, Not to an ending, but to a decision made in full awareness of what had been lost and what could still be found. The vineyard shimmered in soft afternoon light, its rows full and green under the watchful sky. Guests sat in white wooden chairs, faces turned toward the simple archway draped in wildflowers and linen. The breeze carried hints of lavender and soil, rich, clean, familiar. Caspian stood beneath the arch, his fingers slightly curled, his breath calm. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't distracted. For once, his mind wasn't juggling a dozen tasks. It was right here, rooted in one moment, and one woman walking slowly down the aisle toward him. Ariel wore a dress of flowing ivory, simple and elegant, like her. Her hair was pinned loosely, a few strands falling across her shoulder. But what captured him most was her expression, peaceful, steady, full of knowing. She had chosen him again, not because he had become someone else, but because he had finally returned to who he was meant to be. At her side walked Leora and Finian. The twins carried small notebooks in their hands, their pages folded, drawings peeking through. When the vows were spoken and the ceremony quieted, the officiant paused and turned toward the children. There are two others who've asked to speak. Leora stepped forward first. She cleared her throat and opened her sketchbook. I don't have grown-up words, she said, but I have pictures of what love feels like. She held up a page, a sketch of the four of them under the old tree, near the back fence, sitting together, hands touching, eyes open. I drew this after he helped me plant wildflowers by the porch, she said, nodding at Caspian, because that day, I knew he would stay. The guests blinked back tears. Even the officiant had to pause. Then Finian walked up, slower, more deliberate. I don't like poems, he said plainly, so I wrote a promise instead. He unfolded a piece of paper, straightened it once, and read without flinching. I promise to guard this family like a knight. I promise to tell the truth, even when it's hard. And I promise to never let anyone forget that we all got a second chance. He turned to Caspian. Even you. The crowd clapped, not out of politeness, but from something real, something rare. Ariel placed her hand on Caspian's chest as they stood together. We did it, she whispered. He leaned close, forehead resting against hers. No, you did it. You held the world together while I was too lost to see it. You found your way back. He smiled. You were the way back. In the months that followed, Caspian stepped away from the executive floor of Sterling Row. He didn't vanish from the company. He simply gave others the room to lead. He no longer needed control to feel secure. He no longer needed titles to feel worthy. He took up morning chores at the vineyard, repaired the mailbox, picked up the twins from school, joined Ariel's art class on Thursdays not to teach but to sit in the back and sketch alongside children who didn't care what he used to own. In the center of the small town, a new building went up. Painted in soft blue, with wide windows and open rooms, it became known as the Sterling House. Not a business office, not a gallery, a foundation. Its mission was simple, to support single mothers, aspiring artists, and children from overlooked communities. It offered art supplies, mentorships, childcare grants, and quiet space for people to rediscover their voice. All of it was funded privately by Caspian, but his name was never printed on the wall. Only one quote hung above the front door, in soft lettering. Love is the only empire worth building. That was Elias's legacy, not the firm he co-founded. It wasn't in stock portfolios or properties. It was in people, in second chances, in showing up after silence. Caspian visited Elias's grave quietly every year, on the same day he'd first, sat in that oak-paneled office and heard two names that changed everything. He never brought flowers. He brought stories. Updates about Leora's newest sketches, about Finian learning to play guitar, about Ariel painting again for herself, not just for her students. And once, he brought his wedding ring, not because he was giving it up, but to let Elias know. It had found its place. Some nights, when the stars were bold and clear, Caspian would sit out on the porch with a cup of tea, Ariel beside him, Leora curled up near the door with her notebook, Finian humming something tuneless from the window above. The world didn't need to know what he had built here, but it mattered, because it was real. And because this time he stayed. What you just experienced wasn't just a story about wealth, inheritance, or even lost love. It was a story about return, not to a person or a place, but to the parts of ourselves we forget when life gets too loud, when ambition becomes armor, when silence replaces affection, and when love, if not nurtured, slips quietly out the back door. Caspian Rowe didn't get a second chance because he was rich. He didn't get a second chance because he asked for it. He got it because he changed. Because he finally showed up, not as the man who needed to win, but as the man who needed to heal. And Ariel didn't say yes because she forgot the past. She said yes because she watched him grow into the version of himself she always believed was underneath the noise. Their children, Leora and Finian, didn't need perfection. They needed presence. They needed truth. They needed someone who would stay when it was easier to leave. And in the end, they got that. They got a family, not a flawless one, but a real one. Now let me speak to you, the person still watching or listening. If you've ever made a mistake that cost you someone, if you've ever let time pass and silence fill the spaces where love once lived, if you've ever wondered whether you're too far gone to make things right, let this story remind you, you are never too far gone to return to love. But it takes more than words. It takes showing up. It takes listening. It takes being willing to put in the quiet work that no one applauds, but that changes everything. You may not be able to rewrite the past, but you can absolutely choose who you become next. And that choice, that's your power. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of someone, or if it made you reflect on your own journey, leave a comment, even just one sentence. Share with us, what part of this story stayed with you? Have you ever had to come back to someone you loved? What's the one promise you'd want someone to keep? Tap the like button to let us know this story meant something to you. Share it with a friend, a sister, a brother, someone you haven't spoken to in a while. And if this kind of storytelling speaks to your soul, subscribe to Mr. Ross Story Trail, where we don't just tell stories, we explore the parts of life that often go unspoken. Because stories like these, they're not fiction, they're reflections. And sometimes they're reminders of what's still possible. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling. Thank you for being part of this journey. Until next time, keep your heart open, keep your feet planted in the present, and never stop believing that love, when fought for, can still grow again. This is Mr. Ross Story Trail, where every story is a step toward something real,